Behind the grandeur of the Ashford name lies a trail of madness, murder, and an ancient pact that defies time itself. This is not just a story, it's a warning. Welcome to the chilling descent into the macabre history of the Ashford family, a sinister tale. It began in the waning days of the 17th century when the Ashford family was little more than a struggling aristocratic line clinging to a decaying estate on the edge of the moors. The patriarch at the time, Lord Alaric Ashford, was a man of ambition and bitterness, desperate to restore his family's waning influence, and humiliated by the whispers that the Ashfords were all but finished. He was not a man to believe in fairy tales or spirits, but desperation has a way of shifting one's beliefs. When a stranger arrived in the dead of winter, cloaked in black and speaking in riddles, Alaric listened. The stranger claimed to be a collector of forgotten debts and ancient secrets, offering Alaric a contract that would elevate his bloodline above all others. Wealth would return. His lands would flourish. His descendants would be feared and respected. But the stranger asked for something in return, not gold, nor land, nor titles. He asked for the family's legacy, its soul, to be bound. The pact required the blood of the Ashfords to remain within the ancestral line, unbroken and loyal, for the power to endure. Alaric, eager and blinded by pride, agreed. That night, he performed a binding rite in the crypt beneath the manor. The ritual involved a chalice carved from a human bone, filled with his own blood and the ashes of the family's dead. The crypt trembled. Candles burned black. The air tasted of copper and ash. Alaric emerged changed, not in appearance, but in presence. From that moment, misfortune turned to favor. Ashford lands yielded a sudden bounty. Rivals fell into scandal. Gold flowed where before there was dust. But the cost of the pact revealed itself subtly, like rot behind the walls. The first to suffer was Alaric's youngest daughter, Clara, who began speaking in tongues at night, her eyes turning black in the candlelight. She was eventually found dead at the base of the manor's tower, her body twisted unnaturally, a smile frozen on her face. The family physician claimed it was madness, but servants whispered that something had pushed her. Alaric had her buried in secret, and no one dared speak of her again. Each generation thereafter bore the mark. A sudden death here, a disappearance there. Children with unsettling gifts, able to hear thoughts, to speak of events they could not have known. Dreams that weren't dreams at all, but visions of a room deep beneath the house where something waited. The Ashford name, once revived, grew shrouded in unease. The curse, though, was clever. It gave with one hand and took with the other. The Ashfords built wealth and power, securing positions in courts, industry, and later politics. But each generation paid a price. Those who tried to leave the family met with tragic ends. Those who broke the bloodline by marrying outside it produced children who were either stillborn or mad. The estate, too, changed. Corridors shifted. Rooms disappeared or reappeared with different contents. Paintings altered their subjects' expressions. Mirrors sometimes refused to reflect what stood before them. The villagers in nearby Black Hollow began to avoid the estate. They claimed the air grew colder near the Ashford grounds. The birds would not fly over the roof. The family chapel was abandoned after a priest who came to bless the house vanished during evening mass. No one spoke openly of the Ashfords anymore. They became legend and warning, a family cursed by ambition, shackled to something ancient and malevolent. Alaric himself lived far longer than natural, his face remaining youthful as his peers withered. But in his final years he descended into silence. Servants found him wandering the halls at night, mumbling to the shadows and flinching at invisible voices. When he finally died, no one dared open his sealed coffin. A thick, sticky substance seeped from its corners for weeks after the burial. The blood pact had been sealed. The Ashfords were bound to something far older than time, something that fed on their lineage and rewarded them in turn until, inevitably, it would want more. Generations after the Ashfords first carved their legacy into the soil of Black Hollow, a pattern of sinister events began to unfold. Quiet at first, like a whisper in a long abandoned room. The signs were subtle, a ring missing from a locked drawer, an old portrait disappearing from a corridor wall, a sealed door found ajar in the dead of night. But as the years passed, these peculiarities gave way to darker omens. The Ashford heirlooms, objects steeped in family myth and occult significance, were vanishing one by one. Each disappearance coincided with a more chilling loss, the death or unexplained absence of a family member. The Ashfords were an old family, proud and secretive, and their artifacts held more than sentimental value. Each object was said to be linked to a specific ancestor and a particular fragment of the ancient pact that had cursed the bloodline. The silver locket worn by Marjorie Ashford before her throat was slit by an unseen force. The bone-handled dagger believed to have belonged to Thomas Ashford, who vanished in 1742, only for his bloodied cloak to be found nailed to the manor gates. The Ashwood cane passed down through generations, carved with cryptic runes no scholar could translate. Gone without a trace the very week that Gregory Ashford walked into the woods behind the estate and never returned. What the family could not explain, they chose to deny. Whispers of theft, madness, and suicide were muffled under a heavy veil of respectability. But within the walls of Ashford Manor, servants spoke freely to one another, and villagers in Black Hollow grew wary of their once revered patrons. The house itself seemed complicit. Rooms once brimming with family relics slowly emptied, as though the manor were purging itself. Some said the objects were returning to whatever hellish vault they came from, called back by the entity with whom the first Ashford struck their bargain. Others believed the heirlooms were simply demanding new sacrifices. One event in particular cemented the dread tied to these vanishings. In the winter of 1874, young Beatrice Ashford, barely 13, came screaming into the great hall, her nightdress soaked with blood. She had awakened to find her elder brother Malcolm missing from the nursery they shared. The room was ransacked. The family crest that had hung above the fireplace, a stained glass depiction of the Ashford sigil encircled by symbols of fire, bone, and thorn, had shattered inwards as if something had passed through it from the other side. Malcolm was never found. Beatrice, once lively and precocious, stopped speaking entirely and spent the remainder of her life in a convent sanitarium, drawing the same image over and over, a hollow-eyed man cradling a crown of teeth. After Beatrice, the disappearances slowed but never ceased. With each missing heirloom, the family line grew thinner. Those who left the manor for good, marrying outside the bloodline or settling in distant cities, were often spared. But those who stayed close, those who lingered near the family home or dared attempt to recover what was lost, met grim fates. A letter from 1903, penned by Arthur Ashford just days before his own disappearance, hints at a growing awareness of the pattern. "The house does not forget," he wrote. "It calls what belongs to it, and punishes those who try to interfere. The locket is gone. I am next." In modern times, only the boldest of historians and occult scholars have attempted to trace the Ashford heirlooms, believing them to be keys to unlocking the truth of the family's blood curse. But every effort is thwarted, each trail cold or abruptly severed by misfortune. Those who come close often vanish themselves, as though the curse extends beyond the bloodline to anyone who dares unravel its tangled history. And now, with nearly all heirlooms lost and only a handful of descendants remaining, the Ashford name teeters on the brink of extinction, not just from time or neglect, but from a malign intelligence that seems determined to erase it, piece by piece. The Ashford Manor stood alone on the cliff's edge, battered by the ceaseless winds of Black Hollow, and cloaked in a shroud of perpetual fog. Locals refused to go near it, not simply because of its looming, decayed grandeur, but because of the strange stories that clung to it like ivy. Whispers of the house being alive, aware, had followed the Ashford family for generations, and those rumors were not the fanciful imaginings of fearful villagers. Those who had spent any real time within the manor often emerged altered, or they didn't emerge at all. Built in the early 1700s by Mortimer Ashford, the mansion had grown over time, not through construction, but through unnatural expansion. Hallways that once led to bedrooms now twisted into unfamiliar corridors. Doors appeared where there had been none, and staircases moved without explanation. What was most unsettling, however, was the feeling that the house was watching. Mirrors reflected things that weren't there. Paintings shifted subtly when no one was looking. Eyes following movements, smiles widening just a hair too much. A single portrait of Mortimer himself, placed above the great stone hearth in the drawing room, was said to blink when the room fell silent. Visitors often spoke of hearing footsteps in the attic, pacing in slow, heavy rhythm, despite the area being sealed off decades ago. One maid, employed briefly in the 1890s, claimed to hear her own name whispered from the walls at night, as though the house had learned it, and was testing how it sounded. She left the following morning, barefoot and screaming, never to speak again. Servants who remained told tales of vanishing tools, voices calling them to non-existent rooms, and strange figures glimpsed in reflections never seen directly. No explanation ever sufficed, and the Ashfords, in typical fashion, did not seek one. They had long accepted the house's nature, as one might accept a flawed inheritance. Some believed that the manor's sentience was born of the original pact Mortimer made, an agreement never recorded but hinted at in cryptic journal entries recovered in the 1940s. The house, they said, was the physical echo of that bargain. It became the vessel through which the entity maintained its grip on the Ashford bloodline. That entity was never named, but recurring imagery in the carvings and tapestries within the house, a goat-headed figure with many eyes, suggested something older than folklore, something pre-human and cold. By the time Eleanor Ashford lived in the manor in the 1920s, the house had fully turned on its inhabitants. Rooms became traps. One cousin was found dead, crushed beneath a collapsed ceiling in a part of the house that hadn't existed the day before. Another, a child named Henry, was lost during a game of hide-and-seek. His body was never found, but the walls began echoing with childish laughter afterward. Eleanor, obsessed with reclaiming control, began conducting rituals in the basement crypt, believing she could commune with the house, or perhaps with whatever lived inside it. She succeeded only in deepening its hunger. After her death, the manor fell quiet for decades, almost as if digesting her. In recent years, strange occurrences resumed with new intensity. A modern-day descendant, drawn back to the manor by increasingly vivid dreams, found the house inexplicably intact, despite decades of abandonment. Electricity still flowed. Fire still burned in the hearth without fuel. The manor had been waiting, and once someone entered, it made no promises about letting them leave. For those few who have survived a night inside, the same conclusion remains. The Ashford Manor is not haunted in the traditional sense. It is not simply home to ghosts or spirits. It is the ghost. A conscious, shape-shifting monument to the family's sins, growing stronger with each generation's failure to break the curse. It remembers, it learns, it adapts, and it watches, always. The house is never truly empty. Eliza and Edmund Ashford were born on a storm-lashed night in October 1839 in the cold upper chambers of Ashford Manor. Even as infants, they were said to cry in perfect unison, their mirrored expressions unsettling to the superstitious staff who worked the sprawling estate. From an early age, the twins displayed eerie synchronicity in speech, mannerisms, and even dreams. They could complete each other's sentences and often claimed to see things others could not. Eleanor Ashford, their mother, believed them to be gifted, chosen by the family's ancient lineage. But those who lived near Black Hollow whispered that the twins were marked by something far darker. By adolescence, the harmony that once defined them began to fray. Eliza grew secretive, obsessed with the Ashford family archives and the grim, dust-covered volumes hidden in the locked study of their great-grandfather, Leopold Ashford, a man whose name was never spoken without a cross being made in the air. Edmund, on the other hand, turned to the more material manifestations of their birthright, overseeing the estate's lands and growing restless with the whispers of the past. Where Eliza saw purpose in the family's cursed history, Edmund saw burden, and yet they remained unnaturally close, their tension never fully boiling to the surface. That changed the day Eliza discovered the heart of the hollow, a blackened relic, carved from what appeared to be petrified bone, locked behind a false wall in the east wing. Wrapped in animal hide and sealed with arcane symbols, it pulsed with a heat that defied its dead appearance. The family journals, some written in scripts that bled when touched, spoke of the relic as a vessel, one that could hold or transfer essence, prolong life, or even fracture souls. Eliza became consumed with its possibilities, believing it the key to mastering the Ashford legacy. She began speaking of transcendence, of binding their souls to the land, of achieving immortality at the cost of flesh. Edmund, horrified by what he called her descent into madness, tried to destroy the artifact. One night he stole it from the study, intending to cast it into the sea beyond the cliffs, but Eliza stopped him. Their confrontation beneath the silver-spined trees of the manor grounds was not witnessed by mortal eyes, but the earth seemed to remember. The twisted trunks of the woods still bear black scorch marks, and to this day, no birds sing in that place. It is said they screamed incantations at one another, each invoking the name of the entity their bloodline once bargained with. The relic cracked open during the conflict, releasing a thick, unnatural fog that rolled across the grounds and froze everything it touched. Servants who ran to help fell into a catatonic silence. Their eyes rolled back, mouths locked mid-scream. When dawn broke, only the twins remained, dead, yet not at peace. Eliza was found crumpled in the garden maze, her face contorted in a mask of ecstasy and terror. Edmund's body lay on the steps of the chapel, his chest caved in as though his heart had exploded from within. Both had black veins spidering from their eyes. The heart of the hollow was gone, leaving only a scorched symbol etched into the stone pathway, a sigil that no scholar since has been able to fully translate. The deaths were officially recorded as tragic accidents, a fire blamed for the devastation that spread through the parts of the manor that night. But those close to the family knew better. After their deaths, the manor changed. Shadows no longer fell as they should. Mirrors refused to reflect anything after twilight, and the portrait of the twins, once a serene depiction of childhood, warped over time, the painted figures twisting to face away from each other, as if unwilling to meet each other's gaze ever again. What truly passed between Eliza and Edmund that night remains one of the greatest secrets buried within the Ashford lineage, but some say the siblings never really died. Their voices have been heard in the West Wing during storms, arguing in whispers, begging, threatening. Visitors speak of dreams filled with mirrored halls and disjointed chants, and some claim to have seen fleeting figures, identical in form, watching from opposite ends of the same hallway, forever divided by a past soaked in blood and betrayal. To this day, no member of the Ashford family dares enter the forest where the relic was cracked, and the east wing remains sealed, the lock rusted shut, with something darker than time. In the chilling depths of the Ashford family's legacy, one figure stands out in terrifying clarity. Eleanor Ashford, the reclusive matriarch who came to embody the very soul of the family's corruption. Born in 1889 under a blood moon, Eleanor was marked from the start. Her arrival coincided with a series of unexplained events. Livestock mutilations in the nearby village of Black Hollow, the sudden death of her father under suspicious circumstances, and whispers among the staff of ghostly figures stalking the corridors of Ashford Manor. Even as a child, Eleanor was peculiar. She spoke in riddles, spent hours in the manor's crypts, and seemed unnaturally connected to the family's darker past. By the time she came of age, the Ashford family had grown smaller and more secretive. Deaths came more often than births, and the once glorious estate had taken on a haunted heir. It was Eleanor who assumed control of the manor after her mother's untimely and gruesome demise. Her body found floating in the reflecting pool, her eyes removed with surgical precision. The townsfolk whispered that Eleanor had inherited not just the estate, but the family's pact with the unknown entity that had granted them power centuries earlier. She neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. She simply lived in silence, appearing only to issue cryptic instructions or demand rare books and occult artifacts brought in from the old world. Strange lights were seen in the windows of the manor at ungodly hours. The village priest claimed the church bells rang by themselves whenever Eleanor passed near. No one dared confront her, not even the remaining Ashford relatives, who were either too frightened or too spellbound to act. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her voice was hypnotic and cold, as though spoken from a place beneath the earth. It became clear to those who remained on the estate that Eleanor was not merely guarding the family's secrets. She was building something. In the 1920s, the manor's lowest level, previously sealed since the Ashford twins' violent deaths, was reopened under Eleanor's command. The space was no longer just a crypt. She had transformed it into a ritual chamber, lit only by black candles, and decorated with symbols no living scholar could translate. Rumors spread of disembodied chanting, of screams muffled by thick stone walls, and of shapes that walked without feet. Eleanor was seen dragging something heavy and shrouded down the stone stairs. Some said a corpse, others a living person. Those who attempted to investigate disappeared. Among them was Jonathan Mace, a folklore professor who had become obsessed with the Ashford curse. His final letter, sent to a colleague, described a ceremony of preservation Eleanor had hinted at, something involving blood, memory, and the soul's containment within a vessel. Mace believed Eleanor was attempting to prolong the Ashford lineage not through children, but through soul transference. His body was never found. Eleanor herself seemed untouched by age. Photographs taken of her over 3 decades showed no visible change. Her skin remained porcelain smooth, her hair stark white, her eyes sharp as ever. Servants noted her hands were always cold, no matter the season. She claimed to dream of past lives, always from the same perspective, always within the same halls. When the last of the Ashford cousins died in a suspicious fire, Eleanor stood alone, the last bearer of the name, surrounded by echoes. Then one autumn morning, she vanished. Her bed was untouched, her ritual chamber still glowing with a faint heat. Only a note remained on her writing desk, written in her precise script. "I have gone deeper into the root. I am with the blood." The manor was abandoned, left to rot under layers of ivy and fog. But the rooms never grew cold, and the mirrors still occasionally reflected a figure no longer there. Eleanor Ashford did not die, not in the conventional sense. Some believe she succeeded in her ritual, preserving her essence within the walls of Ashford Manor, or passing into a descendant yet unaware of the role they must play. Whatever the truth, her chapter in the Ashford family history remains one of its darkest, and it was only the beginning of the horrors that would soon awaken once more. The rain fell in a ceaseless drizzle the day Evelyn Ashford returned to her ancestral home. Ashford Manor, long abandoned and rotting at the edges, loomed like a carcass at the edge of Black Hollow, its ivy-strangled facade barely distinguishable through the fog that clung to the moors. She had not come for nostalgia. She had come for answers. Since childhood, she had been plagued by dreams that weren't hers, images of blood-slick floors, whispered Latin prayers, and corridors that stretched longer than any blueprint allowed. She had spent her life trying to forget them. But lately, the dreams had changed. They had become louder, more vivid, and they all ended the same way, with a door that opened in the dark and something calling her name. The townsfolk had offered little when she arrived, their eyes darting toward the manor whenever she introduced herself. One old man muttered, "Ashford blood opens old wounds," before turning away, leaving her with a key that had long since tarnished. It fit the front door perfectly, as if the house had been waiting. Inside, the house breathed a stale, fetid air. Dust and mildew clung to the wallpaper, and long sheets draped over furniture looked like corpses in repose. But the house was intact, not a squat, not a ruin. Evelyn felt a sense of arrangement, as though someone or something had kept the manor just shy of death. At night the dreams returned, but now they bled into waking life. She would wake to find the hallway outside her room longer than before. Doors that led to stairwells she didn't remember walking up, voices whispering lullabies in an old dialect of French. Each night, the same vision came. A ritual in the catacombs beneath the manor, a woman in a black veil chanting before a pit of flickering red light. Eleanor Ashford. Evelyn saw her clearly now, hollow-cheeked, her lips moving in sync with a voice Evelyn somehow already knew. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory, not her own. She found the catacombs on the 3rd day. Behind the fireplace in the study, she discovered a rusted latch. It opened to a spiral staircase carved directly into stone. As she descended with the lantern, the air grew warmer, as if something far below still burned. At the base, she stepped into a chamber of brick and bone. Ritual symbols painted in old blood still lined the walls, unweathered by time. At the center stood a stone altar, cracked and blackened, and on the far wall hung portraits of her ancestors, Eliza, Edmund, Eleanor, all with eyes scraped away. There, Evelyn uncovered journals wrapped in oilskin and sealed with wax. Eleanor's handwriting filled every page in precise, careful ink. The entries were obsessions, records of failed rituals, incantations, desperate attempts to seal the Ashford curse. One passage struck Evelyn cold. The soul survives if the bloodline endures, but each vessel must remember. Each heir must awaken. The final pages bore Evelyn's name, written decades before her birth. Something in the house had been waiting for her. After that, Evelyn stopped sleeping. The manor became a living thing, its walls pulsing in her periphery, its mirrors showing reflections she hadn't made. In the upstairs nursery, she found a dollhouse replica of the manor, with doors that opened on their own. In the east wing, she discovered a locked room filled with children's drawings, stick figures hanging from trees, black-eyed women in red dresses, and the word mother, scrawled over and over. She tried to leave once, only to find the road washed away by floodwaters that hadn't been forecast. Her phone had no signal. The generator, which had worked for days, sputtered and died, and the whispers became clearer. They were no longer voices from the past. They were calling to her now. It all led to one final night. In the catacombs again, Evelyn reenacted Eleanor's last ritual, half in defiance, half in surrender. The journal had described it as a soul binding, a rite meant to contain the Ashford essence within a willing host. But Evelyn realized too late that she was not meant to seal it. She was the vessel. As the final words left her mouth, the chamber erupted in red light. The ground shook, the portraits wept black ichor, and the temperature plummeted. Then everything stopped. Silence. Stillness. When morning came, Evelyn awoke in the same room she'd first slept in, unmarked, untouched. The manor looked cleaner, brighter, like a new coat of paint had been applied overnight. The air smelled of lilac and old wood. The curse had not been lifted. It had simply moved in. And Evelyn Ashford was now its keeper. The Ashfords were just one thread in the tapestry of terror we weave here. If you crave more haunted legacies and forbidden truths, subscribe to Bloodlore, where the past never stays buried, and neither do the dead. Until next time, keep the lights low